Good morning. I'm Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver. Just ahead on News One Now, politics back on track. GOP presidential candidate Donald Trump finally releases his plan for the economy. But his opponent, Hillary Clinton, says his ideas don't make any sense. Our panel will break that down. The fight for voting rights in Virginia continues. Two highly ranked members of the NAACP are arrested while fighting for your right to cast a ballot in this year's crucial presidential election. Rewarded for being racist? That's what many are claiming after the city of Los Angeles pays out $50,000 to a former police officer who was fired after making racist comments during a training session. The Olympics are officially in full swing in Rio. TV personality and pop culture expert Juan Murray joins us to talk about his experience while at the Games. News One Now starts right now.
If you were a foreign power looking to weaken America, you couldn't do better than Hillary Clinton's economic agenda.
But this is from a guy who has said he knows more than the generals about ISIS. So he's not only putting our national security at risk, now he's putting our economy at risk.
In the race for the White House, Donald Trump finally releases his economic plan, but Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton is poking holes in his ideas. Donald Trump says his tax plan and jobs plan is the plan of an outsider with new ideas. He outlined his proposal to a crowd gathered in Detroit. Female protesters interrupted Trump at least 14 times, calling out his treatment of women as security escorted them outside of the venue. In between the outburst, Trump explained his plan. He wants to reshape America's tax system and reduce the number of income brackets to 3. The businessman also promised to cut the tax rate on the rich to 33%. He wants to make child care tax deductible and as well as the estate tax and cap corporate taxes at 15%. Trump would also like to redo the North American Free Trade Agreement with Mexico and reject the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as TPP. Critics immediately gave the plan a thumbs down. Analysts say the plan adds at least $8 trillion to the national debt and would probably hurt the economy and significantly kill jobs. Clinton strongly opposes the plan, saying it would only benefit the rich. However, Trump says his plan can revive a stagnant U.S. economy.
I am proposing an across-the-board income tax reduction, especially for middle-income Americans. This will lead to millions of new and really good-paying jobs. The rich will pay their fair share, but no one will pay so much that it destroys jobs or undermines our ability as a nation to compete.
They tried to make his old, tired ideas sound new. But here's what we all know, because we heard it again. His tax plans will give super big tax breaks to large corporations and the really wealthy, just like him and the guys who wrote the speech, right?
So let's take a step back and discuss Trump's plan. Joining me in the studio today is Dr. William Spriggs. He's the chief economist for the AFL-CIO. Also here on today's panel is Will Jawando, a former White House official for the Obama administration. Angela Peoples is the co-director of Get Equal, and John Burnett. He's the author and strategic advisor for the New York Republican State Committee. So, Bill, what's the real skinny on Trump's plan?
Well, this is sort of George W. Bush's tax plan rehashed. You can think of it as George Bush doubled.
Oh, God.
And we know what that experiment got us, absolutely nothing. We've run this experiment for 30-some years. We know that trickle-down doesn't work. So what we're essentially doing is cutting a huge hole in the federal budget. It goes to the top, and we've seen no evidence that this generates investment. It definitely doesn't generate jobs. So when you look at it over the time George W. Bush was president, you see that. We had a very mild recession in terms of the number of jobs lost, the length of the downturn, the loss of GDP. But it took him 5 years to get back the jobs lost in that downturn. President Obama regained those number of jobs plus some in a much shorter period. So it doesn't work. It just exacerbates inequality, and the current number one problem we have with growth is inequality. When you look at our failure to have a full recovery in residential housing, it's driven by inequality. Builders are building homes for the rich, but we don't get affordable housing. So we have young people who should be forming families and buying homes, not being able to afford homes. College tuition is driven by inequality. So we see college tuition rising above what the middle class can afford, and we see indebtedness for young people. That's stymieing growth. So a plan that exacerbates growth, that feeds into an old line that we know doesn't work, give it to the rich, and the rest of us will sit around and wait and hope and pray that they'll give us some crumbs. We know that doesn't happen.
But he's also talking about balancing it with these trade deals, doing away with them. What do you think will be the outcome of all of that?
Well, I mean, first, Bill's exactly right. He couldn't have said it better. We've seen a more recent example. If you look at Sam Brownback, the former senator and now governor of Kansas, who took this philosophy and lowered taxes for everybody, for the rich, and now is having to borrow out of the state trust funds to pay for things, and the state's falling apart. They've been downgraded. Their economy is suffering. And so you've seen this not work time and time again. So the fact that we would go there. Then he takes something that I personally care about, child care tax credits, but the way he's proposing it will really help middle income and higher income folks. And if you wrap that all in, you know, I have 3 young daughters. It's a diaper. If you put spray a diaper with perfume, it smells good for a second, but it's still going to stink. So, so I think, and then he hasn't said he's going to pay for it. So it's just a continuation of bad policies.
Absolutely. I think that's the troubling thing about this campaign, is that it's just a continuation of bad policies. Not only is the conversation not based in the reality of where our economy is. Yes, the recovery has missed a lot of people, and there is a specific set of the community that actually needs to find access to better paying jobs, right? We have a lot of people who are recovering into part-time jobs or jobs that their wages are stagnated, but Donald Trump's plan doesn't do anything to address that, right? These cuts to the rich, these presumed business or job creators, which we have not necessarily seen the return on job creation from the extremely investments in the extremely wealthy. But let's say that these folks create jobs. We haven't heard anything about how we will incentivize job creation that's quality jobs, right? That's with wages that are not just minimum, but actually living wages. And so I think that Donald Trump's plan, like most of his campaign, is just a revision of old ideas and is actually not based in the reality and the needs of people in this economy. As Bill said, thinking about folks in my generation, our inability to buy a home, to even move our lives forward, economically or financially, it is very much due to the impact of our debt and the comparison of our wages. And thinking about where any of that opportunity, where anything to address that exists in Donald Trump's plan. And I think also Hillary Clinton needs to lean more into how she's going to address the over-indebtedness of the generation that's coming into its own and raising families. Okay. But again, there's just a lot of missing pieces here.
Absolutely. So what are you thinking about this? Are you happy to see that he switched from his original plan, which all of a sudden, poof, disappeared overnight?
Well, I'm glad I can balance out the panel. Well, I think that.
Can you add some more information to his economic plan too?
Let's look at what has been working. When we look at Florida and Texas, 2 states that don't even have state income tax. But if you back out the jobs that Texas actually generates, and we're not only talking about oil, we're talking about technology, healthcare, biotechnology, things of that nature, they experience a huge economic boom. So if we take that same principle on the state level and apply it to the federal level, like Donald Trump is proposing, we should experience an economic boom. Yeah. One of the things
when has it happened in the past where trickle-down economics has worked on a national scale? Exactly when in our nation's history is that? But
here's the thing: when you run a business, you don't just focus on finance. You focus on marketing. You focus on distribution. You focus on supply chain. So that's what Donald Trump is doing.
But isn't it true that past performance is the best predictor of future performance?
He's also not running he's not trying to run a business.
Let me finish my
He's trying to run a country.
We can sing together, but we can't talk at the same time.
I'm interested.
So the thing is, when you look at it, when you run all those things and do it well, you have a successful business. One of the things in this tax plan is that, and I haven't heard it from anyone else, in the last several presidencies, right? How will you get the offshore funds to come back on shore? They're not going to bring
Like
that
he's
back
doing in
on
his
shore.
business? Like he's doing in his business?
He's not bringing.
In terms of the
no
jobs
one,
that are
no one is
all
not going to
offshore?
bring that money back on shore at a 40% clip, or 33%, right? So if we reduce it down to 10%, we have an opportunity to bring in $1 trillion to $3 trillion of new capital.
I have to hear what Bill would say in response to that.
You're not going to do it at 15%. We are in a global race to the bottom when it comes to corporate taxes. You can find any island nation in the world that's willing to say 2%, 1%, no percent, in order to get a crumb from the profits that get offshored. So the solution isn't for us to lower our rates. The solution is, as President Obama is currently doing, and the rest of the world is doing, to try and go after this tax evasion and have a real meaningful tax floor.
Well, glad you mentioned it.
But going a race to the bottom, you're not getting that money to come back. That is a catastrophe.
I think that's a false narrative. Number one,
No,
again,
it's a true narrative
we have
because
to
that's
run.
what's
We have to
taking place.
run America like a business. All these things, all of these things
Like
running,
all of his businesses
all of
are
these
gone bankrupt.
things.
Decisions through an electoral
I'm not here to
college
argue,
system.
but all
Businesses
these
don't have-
things
Sure.
running effectively.
why you're here.
What you just mentioned has to deal with trade deals.
It's not
Let's
trade deals.
renegotiate
No,
those type of trade deals with those
you are
countries.
trying to run our country as a
That part
business.
isn't from trade deals. That part is from a belief that if you lower corporate taxes, that somehow or another
But you
the
s-
money
but
will
you said
flow
foreign-
to you.
Foreign companies will adjust.
U.S. companies are parking their money wherever they can find a low tax rate.
Exactly.
This is a race to the bottom. So saying the United States is going to fight that fight by saying we're going to go down to 15%. Look, the rising share of GDP is in profit. It's not to workers. That's part of the inequality problem. So the rising share of GDP goes to profits. The falling share of tax revenue is coming from profits. So this formula is, we're going to do a race to the bottom. We're going to outrace Ireland. We're going to outrace the Channel Islands. We're going to outrace Bermuda. We're going to outrace the Cayman Islands to see if we can get down to 1%. If you're running an island, you don't care if you get 0.5%. But you can't run the United States of America on 0.5%. This is not a race we can engage in and win. It's a race.
You can't do that
do it on
trade unless you have a certain trade
You
bill.
mentioned trade. So his trade plans are to start a trade war with China and other big countries, which economists say will bring us into a global recession. And let's not mention his temperament, right?
Oh,
So
Well, 50
when
Republicans
you
already
go in-
have, and they said
right.
it's ridiculous.
Senator Collins yesterday saying she's not going to support him in Maine. So I mean, I think, I know we got to go, but I mean, I just think his temperament, these trade deals are further examples of bad economic policy that's not going to benefit America. So Bill's talking about bringing the money back. We're certainly not going to get
talking
China
about
to stop devaluing their currency.
I'll just say that if we're going to run this country like a business, let's just hope we don't run it like his, 4 bankrupt businesses?
Exactly.
Because that looks like that's the
He
road
has
we're
$10 million
on.
in the bank.
Speaking
$10
of
billion,
this crucial presidential,
Only
because he doesn't
tax-
pay people that
only
he owes.
because he is tax
Taxes.
his tax
No, we still haven't seen his
And because
taxes.
it's taking
Well, we haven't
advantage
seen
of
how Hillary's
bankruptcy.
going to pay for all the free stuff.
We still haven't seen his taxes, but we got to go. Speaking of this crucial presidential election, the fight for voting rights continues across this country. This time, it involves the NAACP's president, Cornell Brooks. Brooks and the NAACP National Director of the Youth and College Division, Stephen Green, were arrested Monday in Roanoke, Virginia, along with nearly 20 activists. The group spent 6 hours peacefully waiting for their voices to be heard inside Representative Bob Gotlett's office. Brooks refused to leave until the congressman agreed to hold a hearing on the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, or until the police forced them out. In the end, Brooks and Green were both arrested and charged with trespassing. The sit-in comes just days after the 51st anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that was signed into law on August 6th by President Lyndon Johnson. The landmark legislation required 9 states with a history of racial discrimination at the polls to request federal permission to change voting laws. That legislation included Virginia. In June 2013, the Supreme Court struck down this part of the act. The NAACP has been urging Congress to restore the Voting Rights Act. That is why they held the sit-in at Congressman Bob Goodlatte's office, because he is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. This morning, Brooks and Green have both been released from custody. I want to turn to the panel now to ask your thoughts on this latest happening. What's going on really quickly from each of you with regards to the voting rights? How come we haven't been able to sort of roll back the challenges that we face as a result of the Supreme Court decision?
I mean, I think it's very clear. You saw it in the North Carolina case where the court said that they changed the laws to restrict black and brown people from voting. And when that's why VRA hasn't been reauthorized. That's why you're seeing these restrictive voter ID and other laws across the country, because they know they can't win if people vote.
Absolutely.
And I think what Dr. Brooks did, and the young NAACP president, I was a former college president, it's great to see that activism is good, because you got to draw attention to these things, and it's systemic poll taxes and other measures to keep us from the voting box, and I think that's what you're seeing.
I think one of the consequences of these attacks on voting rights, whether it's the Voting Rights Act or the voter ID laws that we're seeing in states across the country, is one of the consequences is a further distrust and really weakening of the power of our democracy. I think that this election is really bringing up an energy of folks who are saying voting isn't even worth it, right, at this point, and then seeing, and which I think I don't necessarily agree with, but I do think that it's worth having a conversation. And I think as we're talking about both restoring the Voting Rights Act and pushing back on these voter ID laws, we really need to talk about it in the context of what the power of our democracy really is. And as Will said, that Republicans are really trying to weaken the access to a whole set of our communities, not just minorities, young people, people who are transgender, people who don't have the same amount of access to even just get an ID or even have get to the polling booth. And so I think as we're talking about restoring these rights, we also need to talk about what the attacks mean and what it's doing to the psyche of our democracy in general.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think we can find some common ground here. No vote should be suppressed. Everyone should have equal access to the ballot. With that said, we've seen, at least in New York, with the past election, that there have been claims in the Democratic primary of voter suppression. Why? Because there's a lot of things that go on behind the scene that have situations where certain people have been fall off the ballot. There's currently an audit being conducted by the New York City Comptroller to look into why are these names falling off the ballot, and why are they falling off the ballot on the Democratic side. So we've seen a lot of different things. So we have to bring more. So we have to bring more integrity into the process, and we have to acknowledge that, come together from both sides, and figure out how are we going to bring integrity into the
We're almost
process.
at break. I have to get Bill in, and we're going to have to go to break in just a second.
That's too much of a diversion. I think the Republican Party really has to own up
Fraud is a
to
diversion?
Are you kidding me?
It's a
that
diversion to people
was-
being able to vote.
It's not apples and oranges.
It's
Al
the people being
Sharpton,
able
several
to vote.
congressional leaders
The issue is
mentioned
people
that.
being able to vote and suppressing people being able to vote.
Right, and there's issues on both
And
sides that we need to
and
address.
that is the
That's
issue.
a ridiculous false equivalency,
No,
but we'll have to talk about it more after the break.